Hello, welcome to Indie Tutorials. My name is Guillermo and I would like to thank the Patreon supporting this channel. Good morning everyone, this is Guillermo speaking, and let's continue the series by setting up the input system. So the first thing we need to do is go to the edit button in the Unity editor and scroll down to the project settings. Here you can find the input system package right off the box. We don't have any settings asset created yet, so click on that one and that button, create settings asset. It will create a new scriptable object type of file in the project hierarchy, and what we want to change here is the default dead zone min and default dead zone max. So this is basically what is saying that from our controller, Xbox controller or PlayStation controller sticks, if we get a magnitude value below that 0.125, it will be set to 0, and the max, any value above 0.925 will be set to 1. But in this case, let's just change it to 0.2 and 0.8. Okay, we can keep everything else like that, not change so far. But what I like to do to not have this input settings file floating here, I will create inside my project folder a data folder, and I will drag it into that one. For example, I already put here this new terrain stuff that is created every time you create a new terrain. It's just to keep things clean. Alright, so let's close the input system package. We of course, you remember that we are using from the input manager, we still have access to the old system input because ORK Framework requires that, and in the player settings we set it to use both. Active input handle, use both. Okay, so let's close it up and let's move into the next step, which is to create the action maps. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do to start creating our action map is actually plug in your controller, whether it's the Xbox controller or the Xbox One or PlayStation controller. So let's just plug it in. You can see that I already did that. And what we want to do, let's say for example click on our player game object, or it could be any other game object for the time, it doesn't matter really, so just create an game object empty, and here we need to add component player input. So this is the quickest way to start creating action maps actually. So let's you can here create actions, this button, and it will create a default set of action maps for you. So this is the quickest way to do it. So let's click on that one, and it's asking you where to want to save this file. So let's go to data, but I will change the name of this input actions to something like game input map, and click save. So we have here the game input map. It's already open on the other screen, and as I mentioned, it is the quickest way because out of the box it will create a player action map for you with the move, look, fire and UI actions for navigate, submit, cancel. That it's going to be very handy, so we don't need to recreate everything, but we are going to be a little more picky in this case because we want to mimic or replicate what actual Souls game input actions are or are set, and specifically because there is a lot of tutorials out there regarding Souls game in Unity. They all refer to Dark Souls type of Souls games, and I'm weird about it. I like to do it with the Bloodborne type of gameplay, if you don't mind. So of course Bloodborne game is PlayStation only, but we are going to remap all these input actions to the Xbox. So at the end we will have a Dark Souls, Dark game, Dark ARPG game based on Bloodborne mechanics. If you don't want that game, or if you don't like that game and you wanted to go the Dark Souls route, you just follow along and map the inputs accordingly to what Dark Souls does, or Elden Ring, for example. Okay, so with that comment out of the way, sorry, let me close this up, and we are going here in the with input settings. We need to, of course, click on autosave. That will be useful, and also we want to generate C# class, but we are going to set it up after we finish building the first steps here. So I already created some document with some mappings that we are going to set up. So instead of having in the action maps player, I'm going to rename that one to move. So let's click on that, in the right click on the player, and let's see if I can rename it. Yep, and let's call it move. So this action map, the only concern of this action map will be to move the player, not to look, not to fire. In the move actions we already have this left stick gamepad set up, which is good. We have the WASD keys. There is also a primary 2D access for XR controller. I don't care about that. We will leave it as is, but probably will be deleting it. And also we have this stick joystick, which is a generic for all type of joysticks, so we can leave it. Alright. Then in the action maps, let's create a new action map, and let's call this one camera. So what we want here in the camera, we want actually to have the look set up. So this right stick, delta pointer for the mouse, and this is head switch, I believe is for standard controllers. I'm not sure if I could drag and drop. Yes, we could, or not. So let's recreate it from scratch. So silly me, what we actually can do is just click on the look action, right click on it, and from the context menu we can set up or choose cut. Click on the action camera action map, and then right click again and paste, and there we go. So the first one, this new action, we can remove it. So right click and click on delete. Remember, we have the autosave, so we can not bother about saving it. Alright, so we have again move, and we have also this fire, which is mapped to the right trigger. So nope, we don't want that, so we can just delete it. There we go. So let's move the camera action map above one slot, so we have move and camera. The next, here in the camera, we have of course the look, and we also want to add actions when we lock to the target, which is using when we click on the right stick, right? So let's create a new action, and let's call this one lock target toggle, and this is a type of button, so we can leave it as it is. But here in where it says no bindings, what we can do is click on this path drop down, then click on listen and click on our right stick. There we go. So right stick press, I believe. Yeah, let's choose the gamepad. So right stick press will trigger the lock target, and I misspelled this, so let me just fix that. Lock target toggle. Let's and click enter. Okay, so we have the right stick press mapped to this action. For the keyboard, I have no idea how is this being mapped, to be honest. Let me check on the wiki for Dark Souls game, and according to the wiki page, the lock target toggle is mapped to the Q keyboard key. So let's do that. So let's click on plus, add binding, and again path, listen and type the keyboard. Okay, and that will map our keyboard to the lock target. Again, we can also, now that we are here in the right stick press, let's map it to gamepad and joystick, and in the keyboard this is going to be only keyboard and mouse. This is handy if you wanted to then filter by control scheme that we are going to use actually to detect whether we are using a gamepad or a keyboard mouse input. Okay, so we have the lock target toggle set up. We also need lock target right and lock target left, so to switch targets, the inputs to switch targets. Okay, so let's create a new action and let's call it lock target right, and this is going to be of type button as well. And here in the no binding, let's select again listen, and let's move our right stick, so we have right stick left and right stick right. This is what we want, so right stick right, not the Xbox controller but the gamepad. Okay, and again let's just map it to gamepad joystick. And for the keyboard, and it could be we can toggle that. We have the Q to lock. Actually I don't like the Q. Let's do here in the keyboard to lock target, use the tab key. I've seen that in other games. So listen, tab key, and then for the lock target right we use the Q key. So listen for the Q, and let's put it in the keyboard and mouse control scheme. There we go, and let's create a brand new action and let's call it lock target left. And this one in the no binding, let's again listen to the left, right stick left, right stick left gamepad, map it to gamepad and joystick, and let's create a new one, add binding, and this one is going to be listen for the E keyboard button. Yeah, I kind of know that the E keyboard is global keyboard for interactions, but let's keep it like that for the time being. Like I said, I don't like playing games with the keyboard and mouse. I will focus most on the setup of the gamepad. Alrighty, so we have now the lock target toggle, target right, target left. One thing that we need to change though is, you remember we changed the dead zones. So for example, for the right stick gamepad, we want to add here a processor, just to make sure it will use the processor that we set up in the standard settings. Okay, so for the right stick we want to add a invert vector 2 and keep invert Y checked. We also want to add another preprocessor, which is a stick dead zone, and we want to use the default dead zone that we set up in the input settings asset. Then we want to add a scale vector 2, and this will multiply whatever magnitude we have from the stick and use this X and Y as a factor to multiply the magnitude that we are sending through the input. And we can use here 300 and 300. We can toggle those up, tweak those up later on. And for the delta, this is the mouse input, so we want here as well to invert the y-axis. So let's click on invert vector 2 and just leave the y, invert y checked. And we want to add also a scale vector. So this is basically to avoid having when we move the mouse quickly, we will see the camera rotate very fast. So we want to avoid that by setting up this processor. All right. And let me check. I believe in the move I also forgot. So let's see. We have the left stick. Yeah, we have no processor here. So let's just add a dead zone and leave it as it is, so it will use whatever we have in the setup. The reason for these settings or these values here I will explain by adding one of the samples that comes with the new input system in the next section. So if you don't have autosave, make sure you save the settings, and let's move on. Okay, so let's close these settings for a moment, and let's go to the window package manager. We have the input system selected, then we have this drop down to choose several samples that we can install to play with, and what we want to install is these visualizers. So let's click on import, and as soon as it is imported, let's go to the visualizers folder, or let Unity compile the scripts, and let's go into visualizers, and then we should select this gamepad visualizer. So open this up, let's save the changes in the scene, and of course we see nothing here. If we switch to the game view, we have this representation of our gamepad. So let me just maximize it, play maximize, and click on play. And if I were now to use the left stick, you can see the pointer, and it's drawing this circumference. And what I want to achieve with the left stick is how the movement in this Souls game behaves. So basically, when you start moving the left stick up to a certain point, the character is always walking. As soon as you reach, let's say, above 1.8, 1.9 up to 1, it starts jogging or running, if you like to call it that way. And it's always like that. So if I were to stay here, it will still walk. There is no actual blending between those animations. So this is what I want to achieve, and I haven't found no tutorials about this setup. They all use mechanism, blending, walk, run, sprint, and to be honest, to my taste, it looks really junky when you want to go from walk to run. It's just jittering, and yeah, I don't like it. So let's try to accomplish this mechanic for being to use only just a segment of this radius to move walking the player, and if we reach above certain value we start jogging or running. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you. And same for the right stick. I mean, you can here play and select, see the input, and of course, interestingly, this GUI is not using any action map, it's reading the input directly from code, which is interesting to research. Okay, so let me stop playing this demo and let's go back to our scene sandbox. Okay, so we had this game object with the player input. Let's click on the game input so we can focus on it, and let's move on. What we need next is to start adding in the action maps the actual actions that the player can execute. So for example, heal item, or the backstep, dash, jump. Well, in this case we don't use jump, but it's kind of run leap or leap, but we're going to jump to be just in line with other games. Also we want to add here the light attack, strong attacks, the transformation of the weapons, and special attacks with the left triggers. Alright, so let's start. So let's go to the action maps and click on add a new action map, and let's call this one actions. By default we have a new action set up for us of type button, which is okay, so we can just rename it, and let's call it, let's go from the YBAX buttons in the first place, going in a clockwise fashion. So let's start by the Y, and this is going to be in Bloodborne, this is for the heal item, so we use this button to heal the player. Shall we call it heal? Yeah, let's call it that way. And of course we need to create a binding for it, so let's switch to the binding and listen and click the Y button in the gamepad, so button north, which is the Xbox controller, Y Xbox controller, and add it to our scheme. For the keyboard, for Dark Souls games, this is mapped to the F key, but of course in Dark Souls this is meant to switch to hand weapon. But okay, let's just add the binding and map it to the F. Probably I won't forget later on. So path, listen, and type F, and add it to the keyboard mouse. So this is our first action. We need to add another one for the B button, and for simplicity's sake let's call it back step, although you know that when we click on the B button we have to check for several conditions. So whether we are moving and we click the B button, then we roll. If we are standing still and we click the B button, then we back step, of course. And if we are targeting and we click the B button in Bloodborne, we don't roll but we dash. So this is the mechanic that we are going to be implementing. So back step, and let's map listen to this button. So I click B on my keyboard, gamepad, and let's put it on gamepad, joystick. Now for the keyboard, it says it is the space button, so well, let's do it. No binding, again listen, click on the space keyboard and add it to the control scheme. So we have the back step. We need to add a new one, a new action, and this one is going to be called interaction, and we want to map this interaction action to the A button in the gamepad, and we need to add another interaction binding, sorry, and for the keyboard this is going to be the E that we set up earlier. So let's click on E again. So I guess that we will need to handle this on code, whether we are logged on or not, in order to use the interaction key with the keyboard, or select another set of input bindings for the keyboard locks target switch. But anyways, so we have the interaction, and we need to add another action, and let's call it use item, and we want to bind that one to the gamepad X button. So let's click on the gamepad X button and map it to the gamepad and joystick scheme. We want to add a new binding, and this time for the keyboard and mouse we choose in this case to listen for the R key. There we go, and map it to the keyboard and mouse control scheme control scheme. There we go. So we have Y, B, A, X mapped. Save your settings, of course, if you don't have the autosave. And let's move on now to the actions for the right shoulder and or right bumper and right shoulder, RT stick controls. Okay, so let's go to the actions and create a new action here, and let's call this one attack. This is our standard attack, and we want to bind it to the right bumper, so or right shoulder in this case. So gamepad and joystick, and for the keyboard let's add a new binding, and this binding is going to be let's see if we can listen here, listen to the left, well, not the right one, we want the left, so let's just select it from here, mouse left button. Yep. So this will trigger our basic attack or light attack, and we want to add a new action, and this one is going to be, I think I clicked twice, yes, okay, let's reuse it. So we want this one to be the strong attack, or heavy attack, call it whatever you wanted. And for this one we want to listen for the right trigger and put it in the control scheme for gamepad and joystick. And we want to add a new binding, and in this case the strong attack in the Wikia page is set to shift plus left click, but we cannot do that in the input system, using both or checking for the input of both keys. This is actually a known issue or known problem in the input system, I would say, whether if we set somewhere else to use the shift, it will use the shift but not trigger the shift left click as well. So what we want to use is let's say the control key. So let's listen for the control keyboard, left control, and let's put it in the control scheme. Then we have this new action that I duplicate by mistake, and this is going to be our left actions. So let's start by renaming this one to transformation. So this is when you click the left bumper and you transform your weapon from one-handed to a two-handed weapon. And let's bind it by listening to the left shoulder or bumper, gamepad and joystick scheme. And we want to do the same for a keyboard, so let's create a new binding. And for the keyboard I have no clue which button to use, so let's, for the sake of having something here, let's listen to the shift, left shift keyboard, and map it to the control scheme. So we have attack, strong attack, transformation, and of course we have left the left trigger, which is supposed to trigger the special attack if we are two-handed. So let's create a new action and let's call this one left attack. Yeah, I don't like the name either, but let's keep it like that. So let me just put a space in between, and it's going to be of type button as well, and in this case we listen for the left trigger, and let's put it in the control scheme for gamepad and joystick. Now for the keyboard, add a binding, and let's use the right control key. There we go, and put it in the control scheme. So now we have already mapped all the possibles not the possible, but all the actions buttons from the gamepad to a specific action set. Let's move this action map on top of the UI. The UI is another beast that we are going to cover later on, but at least we have this basic setup for the move, the camera settings, and the actions. Okay, I already have autosave, so what we need to go now is to create our C# class that we will use as a bridge to retrieve these inputs and send them to the ORK framework. Okay, so having the input map open, we see here in the right side that we have this generate C# class. So click on that one, and what we want to change here, you can see that it's already expecting to put this file inside the path, this data path, which will be okay. And then it will set the class name already, and it will use a default namespace. Let me check whether it will use the default namespace that we have here, for example in the edit, project settings, editor, and we set somewhere, yes, root namespace. It will choose let's say a company namespace. So let's click apply. And it's compiling the script, and let's check it up. So we have no namespace was created. No, this is not what we want. So let's go back and delete the file, and probably if we go to the settings here and we choose and click now and put our company or something different, you need to have a namespace, because if you have a script that is called the same thing from the asset store or other creator, it will collide. So remember just to use a proper namespace here. So let's click apply, and let's wait for it to regenerate this class, and then yes, now we have a proper namespace. Good. This video is already too long, so let's continue on the next one. Thank you for watching.